router and using a what? A switch. InterVLAN router, using a router and using a switch. So I'm going to connect my console cable to the router, sorry, to my switch. We'll do this very fast, 5 minutes, and we should be done. Desktop terminal. I'll go into my switch, enable, interface VLAN 10, right? That's for the first VLAN for PC1. Gonna wake up, IP address, IP address, 10.0.1.1. Interface VLAN 20. IP address 10.0.2.1. After doing that, please, you have to run this command. This is very, in short, this should be the first command you use. Just type IP routing. IP routing. Just type IP what? Routing. This IP routing command you entered here, okay, forces the switch to route to perform layer 3 function. Does that make sense? It forces the switch to perform layer 3 function. So even if you configure this gateway and you don't do this command, it's not going to work. If you configure the gateway and you don't enter this command, it's not going to work. Let's verify what we have on our switch. Show run or show VLAN. Let's see. See, we've configured interface VLAN 10 and we've configured interface VLAN 20. That's what we have. Interface VLAN 10 and interface VLAN 20. Okay. Interface VLAN 10 and interface VLAN 20. Let's verify and test if it is working. One more. Can you see it's working now? Successful. We're able to ping from VLAN 10 to VLAN 20. Prior to configuring IP routing, it wasn't working. Let's test it out. Let's test it one more time and see. So I'm going to go into my switch and say no IP routing, right? Simple command. Simple, powerful command. Let's test again. You can see it's failing. Good. I'll go back there and I'll type it again. IP routing. Let's test again. Simple but powerful command. That should be done after you have configured your VLAN interface. So we have solved step 1, configuring InterVLAN routing using using the switch virtual interface for layer 3 switch. The second one we're going to look at is configuring InterVLAN routing using a router on a stick. Router on a what? Stick. Right. Just the way we configured this also, we're also going to come into the router, but the difference between the router and the switch is that for the router, we're going to create what we call a sub interface. Sub interface. Sub if. We're going to create a sub if under the main interface connecting to this router, which is the G0 of 0. So we're going to create a sub if under G0 of 0. So under G0 of 0, I'm going to create G0 of 0.4 for just to know what I'm creating it for. I'm going to create G0 of 0 of 30. Of that's going to be for VLAN 30. I'm going to give it that IP address 10.0.3.1. I'm also going to create G0 of 0 dot what? 40. I'm going to give it 10.0.4.1. So I've done that. Okay. Also, don't forget that they said we should verify They said interVLAN route. Sorry, they said the switch ports connecting to this from the switch to the router should also be configured as a trunk port, because why? It is carrying multiple VLAN information from the switch to the router. Look carefully, we have VLAN 30 and we have VLAN 40. So we have to ensure that the port connecting the switch to the router is a trunk port. The port connecting the switch to the router is also a trunk port. So let's verify that quickly before we start our configuration. Let's verify that quickly before we start our configuration, just so we'll be sure. Let's verify that that port G0 of 1 on the switch is a trunk port. If it's not a trunk port, then we have to make it a trunk port. So show IP interface brief. Give you all of these commands already. The port is up. Yes, it is up, but they said, let's see. Protocol is up. Is it a trunk port? We can't verify, so let's verify. Show interface trunk. Let's look at the trunk port on this switch. Is there any trunk port? No. Can you see there's no trunk port? So you have to ensure that you verify if that port is a trunk. So I'm going to go to that interface now. So interface D0 of 1 and go do switch port mode trunk. Let's make it a trunk port. It has to be a trunk port. Now we've verified it's a trunk port. We've configured as a trunk port. And go do the command again. Show interface trunk. It's still not showing, probably because the link is turned off. But let me come back and do this. Show IP interface brief. So let's. Okay, the link is down. The link is down. Let's give it some time. But let me see. Let me show you guys something quickly. It's a trunk port. It's not showing VLAN. It's showing. You can see the hyphen there, like a dash sign for G0 of 1. You can see it's showing the dash sign. Instead of showing VLAN 1, it's showing the dash sign. 2 dotted lines. Okay, but we're going to verify that shortly. So let's come to the router and go to our console ports. And now let's configure the router and do the needful for that router. So I'm going to go to my router, enable, config T. If you notice carefully, you notice that this router does not have an IP address. Did you notice? They didn't give it a particular IP address for this interface, for the G0 interface. The reason is because we don't need it. We don't need to assign a physical IP address here. Let me ask you a question. If I should assign an IP address here, okay, that IP becomes the gateway, right? Please, I need answers. That IP becomes the gateway, right, for G0. Hello? So if we should assign an IP address to the G0 interface here, okay, what happens to that IP? That IP becomes the gateway for everybody under the network, right? As we have always done. But now we have two different networks. We have 3.0 and we have 4 network. There are two different networks. So which of them is going to use that gateway? That is why the need for sub interfaces is very important. When you have multiple connections coming from an internal network, you have to create what we call a sub interface. Sub interface can power up to 50,000 or more interfaces for end users, for access level devices. I'm going to go into my switch and into my router and configure sub interfaces. But before I do that, I'm going to wake up the main interface, which is interface G0. I'm going to do a no shot to wake it up. You can see it's up. I'm going to continue and do no IP address, because I don't need to assign an IP address to that interface. But see what I'm going to do next. Interface G0 0.30. It is going to create a sub interface for me, and it's a virtual interface. You can see it just woke up a virtual interface for me, and I can give it an IP address. IP address. Before I give it an IP address, I'm going to first of all use what we call an encapsulation protocol, which is used to encapsulate and tag VLAN frames, transversing that link, transversing that word link. So I'm going to say encapsulation. I'm going to encapsulate the interface, encapsulation dot 1q. Encapsulation dot 1q is an open standard protocol. We also have encapsulation ISL. ISL is Cisco proprietary. Let me show it to you. Encapsulation space, put a question mark, dot 1q. Open standard dot 1q. Now I'm going to put the VLAN name or the VLAN ID. This is for VLAN 30, encapsulation dot 1q 30. I'm going to enter the IP address. IP address. The gateway is what? 10.0.3.1, and enter the subnet mask. Configure the encapsulation.1 for that particular for VLAN 30, just to be sure what we are doing. See, it's not communicating, it's going to fail. It's not communicating, it's going to fail because they're on different networks. So let's go back to our router and complete our lab. Then I'll go to the other interface G0 of 0.40, another sub interface. Encapsulation dot 1q40 for the VLAN. Enter my IP address. IP address 10.0.4.1. Now I am done. Save my lab. Now let's verify if it is working. I'm gonna move a frame from this PC to this PC. I expect the first one to fail. That's normal. Let's try it again. You can see successful. We have configured InterVLAN routing using the method called router on a what? Router on a stick. Router on a stick. We also configured InterVLAN routing using the SVI interface for the switch. So I'm going to pause this recording for today so we can review a couple of things.